Hello, everybody. So, in the discussion between race and medicine, I came up with the theory of the relationship between race and medicine on both the patient and the physician side. So, going off of that theory, and what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation, is I want to start with just the question of why are race and medicine such an important topic to talk about? And more specifically, why is race in medicine so important to talk about? Obviously, this has been a debate for many years. This is not a new topic. This is not a new discussion by any means. And it's been a debate for years whether or not race should be involved in medicine and what could be the potential benefits and the consequences of using race in medicine. So, before I start with my points and my topics, I want to talk a little bit about the history behind all of this. So, like I said before, this has not been a new idea. This has not been a new concept. Slaves in the 1800s were being used as practice for physicians and research and procedures because, as we all know, slaves were treated as property, and that's all they were seen as. They weren't seen as a human being. That was the same on the medical side. Physicians saw them as what we would use today as a cadaver, is what they saw slaves essentially as. Much medical research, operations, and more were done on these slaves. Obviously, then, as we all know, in 1865, the 13th Amendment was finally passed, which, as we all know, abolished slavery. However, a big reason on the medical side of this, that there was negatives to this. Obviously, slaves were free. They were able to go. They weren't considered property anymore. But unfortunately, as a result, this opened them up to illness and disease as a result of the devastating conditions and environment and the poverty that awaited them when they became free. So many of them were dying at even higher rates as they were before they were free, because when they were enslaved, they were treated poorly, but they had a roof over their head and food, to put it blatantly. Obviously, it wasn't the best conditions, but it was still something. Now they were literally thrown on the streets with nothing. So the death rates were extremely, extremely high. And that was the way it was after this. And nobody seemed to bat an eye until later, which I'll talk about later in this presentation. So what I just spoke about is they're very similar to one of the movies on the list, which was Miss Evers' Boys. I watched this movie and it tied greatly. And it was a great example of what I just talked about how poorly medical professionals treated African Americans during this time. And they only view them as experiments. Because in this movie, it was actually, obviously it was a fictional movie played by fictional characters, actors, but it was based on a very real event. That it was called the Tuskegee Study. And many of you probably have heard about this. It was a terrible, terrible study that was done in regards to syphilis. And the reason that this study was so terrible and so ethically and morally wrong was because it was only done on African Americans. So they would all get syphilis, all these black men. And the kicker with this was that there was already a cure for syphilis, but they wanted to see what was done to your body physically and neurologically to these men that had syphilis, and to see what the body did. Eventually died from this disease, but they wanted to research the effects and, again, use them as basically a cadaver when they had a cure for this the whole time. And they were giving this away to white men and women that had this disease, and they were seeing great results. They were cured, but because of research benefits and this time, they withheld treatment, and all of them succumbed to this terrible disease that could have been curable just for the matter of research. So that movie was a great example of the way that they were treated. So then obviously it wasn't until the 20th century that we finally marked great strides in the recognition of racial discrimination within the medical society. So now, to begin, I'll be talking about two topics of discussion. The first one is the debate between the use of race in medicine and then the discrimination toward minorities in the medical field. So I wanted to do kind of a flip on both sides. So we're looking at the use of race in medicine. Could it be beneficial? Could it be negative? And then the other topic is that on the flip side, the discrimination that Black physicians are facing in the medical field. I thought that was important to kind of see both ends. So my point number one is race beneficial or is it harmful in medicine? This is the main question that everybody's kind of wanting to answer, wanting to know. Many medical professionals want to remove race from healthcare altogether. And the reason for this, one of the main debates and answers and a leg to stand on this side that completely wants to abolish race in medicine, is because they're viewing race as a social construct, and it is not a risk factor for disease. It is not a proxy for biology in medical education, and is strictly just a social construct. It needs to be viewed as that only, which was in a lot of the studies that I found in the journal articles that have been published. That was the main argument on that side. However, the other side now talks about how we can use race in medicine, but they put a little spin on it and talk about epidemiology. So what this is it looks at health inequalities and distribution of diseases in general populations. So this takes into account not just the biology of the race, but the other factors that are included. Because as we all know, it's never just black and white. It's always the populations where someone lives, the environment that they're from, their income level. There's so many more factors at play than just that. So this was another side that people are using, is this epidemiology approach, which could be very beneficial and kind of make everybody happy, because you got the one side that says completely needs to be abolished, race is only social construct, should not be involved in medicine at all. You have the middle, which is this epidemiology that looks at kind of every single aspect to answer this question. And then you got the very far other end of it all that's saying race can very much help us biologically and genetically in research that can even potentially cure diseases. So it's a very interesting thing to talk about, but those are the two sides. I also see in all these research articles that this one journal article says that there needs to be 4 steps that need to be considered when answering this question. And a lot of it is studies, data, like really knowing. And when you look at it all, it's more into play than just race itself. Which brings me into now number 2. My point number 2 is that the discrimination that minorities face in the medical field. So this is now on the flip side. So we know that patients of different ethnicities can be treated poorly. We've established that. But what's not often talked about is how the discrimination toward Black physicians is. In 6 conducted surveys with 13 analyzed data, showed discrimination experienced by physicians of color. Out of all of these that were done, Black physicians encountered their greatest amount of discrimination than any other race. When I further read and did more research, the discrimination that was found was very subtle. It was examples of lack of mentors that they were noticing, social capital, and role models. All of this was lacking. Again, subtle, but it was observed and it needed to be changed. The reason that I mentioned this topic was because I watched a documentary, which was The Color of Medicine, and it was excellent in highlighting these issues, because The Color of Medicine was actually a first all-Black hospital open in St. Louis, Missouri. And the reason it was open because of all these health disparities and inequalities and diseases that were running rampant through the Black community that needed to be taken care of. And it was an excellent documentary discussing how that started, how the hospital and all of the hoops and the challenges and the trials and tribulations that they had to face just trying to keep this hospital open and running and allowing these patients to receive the quality care that is needed. So it was a very great, eye-opening thing to see, and it was easy to tie into, because obviously things aren't as bad as it was way back then, with that first hospital ever opening. But it's still faced today. And like I said, it's subtle. So in conclusion, our view of kind of just what I talked about is, should race be included in medicine? The number one question that we all keep asking ourselves, and I don't know if that will ever be fully answered. Also, I talked about, like I just said, physicians of color face much discrimination. And then the overview of the history and evolution of race within medicine, dating back all the way to slavery. Like I said before, is race beneficial or is this going to be harmful in medicine? We talked about the ends of the spectrum here. Race is a social construct. It should not be a risk factor for disease or research. Or we got the epidemiology approach. We're looking at all different angles here. Or the whole other end, race will always be included because it's beneficial for genetics and research. Wherever you stand, those are the little sides that you see after reading all these journal articles from physicians, from people. Everybody has their own opinion, but those are really the three main areas that people lie. And then, like I said before, many surveys and data showed Black physicians face the most discrimination. And this was in many studies conducted overall, many different hospitals, many have came forward about this. So, suggestions for future consideration that I would give is that I believe that as medical technology and advances continue, I believe we will have an answer to this question. I don't know if it'll be a complete yes or no, but I think it'll help us lean toward, okay, this is where we're going toward, because the amount of technology that we have already in diagnosing stuff is crazy. I feel like we're one step closer to answering this question that's been around for a while. I also think, though, in order for that is we have to stay unbiased. By staying unbiased and keeping an open mind will assist in the involvement of race in medicine. I feel like a lot of times when we try and answer this question or we try and see who's right or wrong, it's always an opinionated, biased answer. I feel like in order to really answer this, we need unbiased, factual, statistical data. And that's going to be the only way to get to where we need to get. And now going off of my second point in this is physicians of color need to be able to have more of a voice when it comes to experiencing these forms of discrimination. This will help to eliminate it from happening to them, as well as prevent it from happening to other people. It's 2024 and we're still experiencing this stuff. That data that was received from all those studies was in 2020, which is still fairly recent for this to happen. So by them getting a voice and having more of a platform, I think will greatly help with that issue. Thank you.